I'm the former advisor of the Special Representative of Secretary General, Mr. Kobler, and also the former Chief of the Human Rights Office of UNAMI. I resigned from this position in protest of what I witnessed in both preparing people to be relocated from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty, and also over the situation I witnessed in Camp Liberty. Let me tell you from the beginning that I was the person who took the lead in drafting the MOU for the closure of Camp Ashraf and the relocation to Camp Liberty. And I could assure you that the draft report I took the lead in preparing was not the one actually approved by Prime Minister al-Maliki. It was redrafted on the 25th of December on Christmas Day. It was redrafted between Martin Kobler and Falih Fayyad, the security advisor of the Prime Minister. But let me also tell you the background of this MOU. We did prepare it with the intention and the ultimate objective of disbanding the MEK, the PMOI. That was the ultimate objective, is to disband the MEK and expel them from Iraq. That was absolutely the policy of the government of Iraq, and UNAMI was there to implement and help the government of Iraq to implement this policy, and we did it. Now, I came to resign because I found myself as the chief of human rights misleading the international community and misleading the United Nations. How? We drafted the MOU and we have not done anything to effectively protect. What we've done is to close Camp Ashraf, relocate the residents to Camp Liberty. Now, we made two assessments to Camp Liberty before people were transferred there. We made a humanitarian assessment, we made a security assessment. And I'm afraid to say that nobody ever mentioned the security assessment we made in November 2011. That security assessment pointed exactly to vulnerability of the camp from the air, from missile attacks. But we did nothing to protect the residents that will be soon arriving there. On the contrary, the United Nations recruited further 62 Fijian soldiers to reinforce the security of the UN personnel that will be going to Camp Liberty. But nothing was done to reinforce the security or to guarantee safety and security of the Ashrafis. That is the security. A humanitarian assessment, we also did it, and I was in charge of that assessment. I reported that that camp was not fit to accommodate 3,200 people. The humanitarian situation was appalling. Now, my boss, Martin Kobler, asked me to lead in actually doctoring pictures and reports. I was asked to put together appealing, this is the word he used, appealing pictures of the camp. And we made lots of them, about 500 pictures of the camp. And he himself had to actually make the selections, which pictures are sellable to the international community and to the Ashrafis. So we did it. We misled the international community, we misled the EU delegation which I used to brief every other week. I used to brief them on the human rights situation, not only in Camp Liberty, but also in Iraq in general. So we misled the international community, and I did warn not only Kobler, but also the UN in general, that the situation is not as presented by Kobler to the international community. Unfortunately, I found no ear to listen to me, and I ended up giving up because I thought that I might pass my message better outside the UN than within the UN. I want to also point out that in preparing this process, we had met with the Iranian embassy, and every time we met the Iranian ambassador, we were first had to prepare to present to him accounts. What have we done so far? And he had never been happy, to the extent he refused to give a visa to Kobler to go to Iran. And I tell you, Kobler got a visa to go to Iran on the day the first group of Ashrafis were transferred to Camp Liberty. So that was done. Now, we had numerous meetings with the Iraqi authorities, and they made public announcement that they will not be bound by the human rights standards of UNAMI or the United Nations. And that is on public record. Every time we discuss the humanitarian situation, we were told, forget about the UN standards, we are not going to give VIP treatment to people who are terrorists. Now, when we decided to finally move on, and in order to convince the international community that everything is fine, the UN hired an expert, shelter experts. They brought him from Ethiopia to visit Camp Liberty and to certify that Camp Liberty is up to the humanitarian standards required. The shelter experts refused. I was with him. We discussed in detail the situation on the ground, and he issued a report, a draft report, saying that he cannot certify. So Kobler decided to do without him, and believe me, this was done at serious money, taxpayers' money, EU money. US as well. So this serious money was spent just to bring somebody to make a report, and then that report was dismissed, and Kobler issued his own report. And we finally convinced everybody that things are up to the standards. And I faced Kobler face to face. I asked him, how can we do that? How can we behave? We are the UN. We have values to live up to. Kobler will tap me on the shoulder and say, be positive. Be positive meaning forget about human rights, forget about humanitarian standards. We need to do a job. We need to close Camp Ashraf. We need to relocate these people. That's the mission. That's what UNAMI is doing. Now, in my job as a human rights officer, I always addressed the Iraqis. And I was also advising the Iraqis in my capacity as a human rights, chief of the human rights office. I always advised them, I requested that the humanitarian standard set by the US Army before they handed over the camp to the Iraqis. I said to them, there is a standard about medical treatments about the food, water, electricity, there are these standards set by the US Army, and we need to keep that standard going. Because after all the supplies that the Ashrafis receive, they pay for them. They pay for it at a more expensive price than what is the price in Iraq. Most of their utilities, most of their needs are imported from Kuwait. And you will ask me why they import from Kuwait. It's because there is a legislation in Iraq to make it a criminal offense to cooperate with the Ashrafis. So anybody, organization or individual who is caught cooperating with the Ashrafis will be prosecuted under the Anti-Terrorist Act. And this is why they resort to importing things at a very high cost. But yet, I hear that the government tries to justify that they are doing all they could in order to facilitate their life. They are denying them to introduce any improvements in the camp. When I asked them, why do you do that? The reply was, we don't want to make their life comfortable because they never leave Iraq if we make their life comfortable. So we'll have to make it, and this I quote, unbearable. So life has to be unbearable, and therefore they will be forced to leave. But let me also mention that there are about 200 arrest warrants against these people. These arrest warrants, some of them issued in Tehran, others issued in Baghdad. These arrest warrants, they target the leadership of the Ashrafis. And the whole process of closing Camp Ashraf and sending them to Camp Liberty is in order to actually arrest the leadership. And the whole problem for Iran and Iraq is the leadership, it's not the rest of the population. So once they arrest, they transfer them to Camp Liberty. In fact, we were expecting that in the process of the transfer, there will be a chaotic situation where the normal residents will sort of just disappear. And then, in that chaos, the government would move in to arrest the leadership. But it did not happen the way the government wished, and therefore no Ashrafi has deserted the camp, and therefore they could not sort of make it so obvious that the operation is in fact targeting the arrest of the leadership. Now, I could tell you, and I had lengthy discussions with the Iraqis, that the security situation is not going to stop there. We witnessed the act of 9th of February, and that was not unpredictable. We knew it's going to happen. And we also know right now that further attacks will happen. And it's organized in Baghdad. The government of al-Maliki is responsible about that. I could tell you that I discussed this. And I was always told that these people are criminals, they're terrorists, they have to, those who have blood on their hands, they have to be arrested and extradited, and those who don't have blood on their hands will just take their way out and disappear in the air. That's the plan. Now, I'm really sorry to sort of find myself in a situation where all the values I lived up to when I joined the United Nations, I find myself facing exactly the opposite. When as a chief of human rights I was advocating that nobody should ever held, arrested or held for a crime, without the due process of law. The United Nations, UNAMI in particular, did everything it did so far on the presumption that these people are guilty. I oppose to this presumption. I asked Kobler, you cannot do that. He tells me, be positive. And be positive, it means just keep your eyes closed. Now, the other presumption of innocence. The United Nations, including, I say here, including the UNHCR, presume that these people are guilty and therefore they do not, they are not eligible for the refugee status. And this is what is delaying the process. And let me remind you that a similar process took place in Camp Mahmoud. You all know Camp Mahmoud. It's a place for the PKK refugees. Be finishing, and I have to tell you, those who were processed at I think 1,500, they were not adjudicated as refugees of concern to the international community. Once you are adjudicated as a refugee, you have the right to freedom of movement, you have the right to travel documents, you have the right to education, you have all the rights of the refugees. The Ashrafis do not have this right, and yet the UNHCR is keeping quiet on this issue. Worse than that, the UNHCR, if you look at clause 7 of the MOU signed by Kobler and the government of Iraq, clause 7 it strips the UNHCR from its very mandate. It said that the Iraqi government will allow the UNHCR to undertake the RSD process, but will not be bound by its outcome. Meaning the government of Iraq will not recognize the refugee status of these people, even though recognized by UNHCR. And yet, we do not report on this. I'm finishing. I just want to tell the audience. The report of Security Council of the Secretary General, I'll tell you how this report was prepared, and it's a normal procedure. Every SRSG, every special representative of the Secretary General prepares his own chapter to be integrated in the Secretary General's report to the Security Council. So what was quoted? The 3 chapters quoted about Ashraf, presented by Kobler, they were prepared in Baghdad by Kobler himself. So here again, misleading the Security Council. And this is very dangerous, I'm afraid. I thank you very much for your attention.